Tonight we begin with a story of desperation turning into defiance, a story that echoes through the streets of Iran as darkness falls. The air is thick with tension, and the city pulses with a restless energy, as if everyone is waiting for something to break. In late 2020 traumazo, in 2025, in 5, in Dakar Shire Ran, in Surin Spidenbites streets, already worn by years of hardship, erupted with a new anger. The faces in the crowd told a story of exhaustion, of people who had endured too much for too long, and who now found themselves pushed to the edge. The spark wasn't political at first. It was the soaring cost of daily life. Prices for even the most basic goods climbed higher each week, making it nearly impossible for ordinary families to keep up. Inflation made bread and fuel luxuries, and families watched their savings vanish. Parents skipped meals so their children could eat, and the fear of not making it through the month became a constant companion. The government's economic missteps, slashing subsidies, broken promises, only deepened the pain. Each new policy announcement seemed to bring more uncertainty, and trust in the authorities eroded with every passing day. Protests began in small towns, not as calls for revolution, but as pleas for relief from crushing poverty. Rural communities, often overlooked, became the first to raise their voices, demanding dignity and a chance to survive. Yet the hardship was inseparable from politics. As the crisis deepened, economic grievances blended with political frustration, and the line between the two began to blur. Many blamed the regime's isolation and costly foreign adventures for their misery. Conversations in public squares turned to anger at leaders who seemed more interested in power than in the people's well-being. The memory of a recent war, with US and Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, was fresh, reminding people of a government that prioritized ideology over its citizens. The scars of conflict were visible, and the sense of betrayal ran deep. As 2025 ended, scattered protests merged into a nationwide movement. What began as isolated cries for help became a chorus demanding change, echoing from Tehran to the smallest villages. The anger shifted from prices to the regime itself. Slogans once about food and fuel now targeted the very foundations of power. The economic spark had landed on political tinder, igniting a blaze that demanded not just relief, but transformation. The call was no longer just for bread, but for justice and a new beginning. Iran was on the brink, not just of protest, but of revolution. The world watched as a nation's pain turned into fury, and fury into a force that could reshape its future. By early 2026, Iran's protests had transformed into a full-blown revolution. What began as scattered demonstrations over economic hardship and political repression had grown into a nationwide movement, drawing in people from all walks of life. The sense of urgency was palpable as Iranians realized that this was a pivotal moment in their history. The streets of Tehran and beyond rang with demands for freedom, not just food. People chanted for dignity, justice, and the right to shape their own future. The energy was electric, and the crowd seemed to grow larger with every passing day. Symbols of the state, government buildings, banks, portraits of the supreme leader became targets for the people's rage. Acts of defiance spread rapidly, as protesters made it clear that the old order was no longer untouchable. The air was thick with both fear and hope. Young Iranians, unafraid, blocked roads and faced down security forces, signaling a generational break from the past. Many had grown up under strict controls, but now they stood at the front lines, determined to claim a different future for themselves and their country. The message was clear: regime change, not reform. Protesters rejected half measures and incremental change, insisting that only a complete transformation could address decades of injustice. Slogans called for an end to the Islamic Republic and the birth of a secular democratic Iran. The vision was bold, and for many it was the first time such ideas had been voiced so openly and widely. The government blamed foreign enemies, but protesters claimed the movement as their own. An Iranian uprising for a new future. They insisted that their struggle was rooted in local grievances and a deep desire for self-determination. Decentralized and leaderless, the revolution spread through encrypted apps and word of mouth, uniting Iranians across divides. Technology became a lifeline, allowing people to organize, share information, and stay one step ahead of the authorities. The people were no longer just protesting policies. They were challenging the very legitimacy of the state. For the first time in decades, the foundations of power in Iran seemed to tremble, as millions demanded a new beginning. The regime responded with overwhelming force, branding protesters as foreign-backed terrorists. Supreme Leader Khamenei blamed the unrest on U.S. deception, giving security forces license for a brutal crackdown. Human rights groups report over 500 killed, including children, as police and Basij militia used live ammunition and batons. The streets, once alive with chants for freedom, became scenes of bloodshed and fear. Mass arrests followed. Over 10,000 detained, their fates uncertain. The government imposed a near-total internet blackout, severing Iran from the world for days. This digital siege crippled daily life, paralyzed banks, and hid the true scale of repression. Authorities raided homes for satellite dishes, determined to control every channel of information. Iran became a black box, its horrors hidden, its people isolated. The world could only guess at the darkness inside. As pressure mounted, Iran's leaders turned their fury outward, blaming the US and Israel for the unrest. The regime's rhetoric grew more aggressive, warning of devastating retaliation if the US intervened. Parliament Speaker Kalibaf threatened to target Israel and US bases, vowing they would burn in the fire of the Iranian nation. Foreign Minister Araghchi echoed this, framing the crisis as a choice between peace and war. These threats were aimed at both domestic and international audiences, projecting strength amid vulnerability. Iran's regional proxies, like Kataib Hezbollah, warned the US that war would have dire consequences across the Middle East. The regime signaled it could escalate the crisis into a regional conflict, threatening global energy supplies. The message, Iran's pain could become the world's problem. The world was put on notice. Iran would not go quietly. The Trump administration answered Iran's crackdown with tough rhetoric, military threats, and new sanctions. President Trump promised on social media that the US would come to the rescue of the Iranian people, raising hopes and risks. Military options were openly discussed, with US forces on high alert. The administration imposed sweeping new sanctions, including a 25% tariff on any country trading with Iran, aiming to choke off the regime's revenue. This move angered China, Iran's key trading partner, setting up a potential economic clash. Despite public threats, back-channel talks continued between US and Iranian officials, hinting at a search for de-escalation. The world watched as both sides prepared for conflict while quietly exploring ways to avoid it. The crisis had become a high-stakes diplomatic and military standoff. Iran's turmoil sent shockwaves through global markets and alliances. Oil prices soared on fears the Strait of Hormuz could close, threatening a spike at the gas pump worldwide. Investors fled to gold, and financial markets grew volatile, reflecting deep anxiety about a wider war. The crisis threatened to slow global growth and worsen inflation, just as economies were recovering from the pandemic. Diaspora protests erupted in cities worldwide, pressuring Western governments to act. Europe banned Iranian diplomats, while Iran summoned European ambassadors, deepening diplomatic rifts. The world was forced to choose sides, as Iran's domestic crisis became a global test of stability and resolve. For foreigners and dual nationals, Iran became a trap. The US urged its citizens to leave immediately, warning that help would be scarce. With flights unreliable and land borders risky, escape routes narrowed by the hour. The internet blackout left people isolated, unable to contact embassies or arrange travel. The regime's paranoia about foreign interference made Westerners targets for suspicion and possible arrest. Every checkpoint, every delay, heightened the fear of being stranded. For those inside, the crisis was a race against time to escape before the last doors closed. The geopolitical standoff was no longer abstract, it was a matter of survival. As of January 14, 2026, Iran and the world stand at a crossroads. The choices ahead are stark, and the stakes could not be higher. One path leads to further escalation, with tensions rising both within Iran and across the region. If the government's crackdown intensifies, the United States and its allies might feel compelled to intervene, raising the specter of a wider regional conflict. Such a move could trigger a chain reaction, military clashes, disrupted oil supplies, and global economic turmoil that would be felt far beyond the Middle East. Another possibility is that the regime succeeds in crushing the protests, maintaining its grip on power, but this would come at a heavy cost. Ruling over a traumatized, embittered population, with its legitimacy in tatters and its future deeply uncertain. The wounds of repression could linger for generations. A third, less likely path is one of internal change. Reformers, students, and dissidents might find common ground, sparking a movement for real transformation from within. The ongoing protests could fracture the regime's unity, leading to a negotiated transition, a military coup, or even the outbreak of civil war. Each of these outcomes would bring its own risks and uncertainties with no guarantee of stability. Every scenario is fraught with danger and unpredictability. The choices made in the coming weeks will shape not only Iran's destiny, but the fate of millions across the region. The future of Iran will ultimately be decided by its people, but the consequences of their struggle will ripple far beyond its borders, affecting global politics, security, and the world economy. The world watches anxiously as 80 million Iranians fight for their future, their hopes and fears echoing in every corner of the globe. The outcome of this struggle will not only reshape the Middle East, but could redefine the balance of power and security worldwide. The coming days are critical. Courage, calculation, and diplomacy will decide what happens next. The world holds its breath, waiting to see which path Iran will choose. Iran's next chapter is being written now, in the streets and in the shadows, as history unfolds before our eyes.